out of about 7.
Okay, so if you want to just, sorry to interrupt you, Tibor, but just click on your screen to say "got it," and then that'll go away. Go ahead, Tibor.
And which means that I don't even belong here because I'm a first generation, not second.
No, you belong. You belong to us. Don't worry. We'll make you included.
And my problem is that instead of being upset and pissed off and having a trauma, I celebrated life ever since. But I spent 20 years in a communist country, became an engineer, PhD in chemistry, inventor, and working glass industry. And then I became an artist, which means that I transferred my problems into art and healed myself. And I'm giving a lot of lectures on healing art as well as, like talking about problems of a living person, a Jew in the world. I was 38 when I got married, and a year later they sent me to Cuba to fix glass factories, glass industry in Cuba. 9 months later, we ran away to Canada and then drifted 9 years later to America, to the United States. And we live in Kingston, New York. And this is basically my very brief biography.
Okay,
for 25 years, I've been an artist. Close by is Woodstock, New York, which was very famous since 1969. And so far, so good. Or I say, so far, so good.
Very good. And so I want to let everyone know to save the date in your calendars. On April 23rd, Tibor and Naomi are presenting their program to our group on the live event. And I knew when I saw Tibor's face on the tile that somehow I knew him, and I couldn't determine where from. And all of a sudden, so some of you who know me very well know that I'm a fanatical fan of film. And since I've been tracing my parents' roots, I have watched over 500 Holocaust films, and even more today. That was probably the number in 221. And so I went back doing some research on a film that would help my research about my parents, and I found this film called Songs of Survivors. And I just happened to say, what is this again? And lo and behold, at the very end of the film, Tibor is on the film. And that's how I learned and knew that I knew Tibor. And I am combining Tibor's presentation with this lovely PBS program called Songs of Survivors. And so, that's what we're going to do on the 23rd. Hello, Devora. Nice to see you. Hello, Ruth. Nice to see you. Michael, since you have to depart us early, I want to give you a chance to chime in now and tell us about yourself, so everyone can be introduced to you.
Thank you. My name is Michael Polgar. I'm a son of and grandson of survivors from Budapest, Hungary. I am working as a professor in Pennsylvania State University, but in the northeast quadrant of Pennsylvania, northeast PA, not far from Tibor. I'm in the Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, Hazleton Metropolitan District, which is about an hour and a half west of Kingston, New York.
Go Lions! Go Lions! It's called
Lions.
Nittany Lions.
Nittany Lions.
All right.
Yeah, the cheer we do is I say we are, and then everybody else says Penn State, and so it's a call and response for 1,000 or 100,000 people in a football stadium. But it's also Penn State's been very good about supporting my work. I've developed a course in Holocaust studies. It's a combined history and sociology course because I'm a sociologist. And I've also recently published a open educational resource, which is a new name for a textbook that's free and online. So with my cousin, who's a performing arts professor in Texas at Texas Christian, we have curated or edited about 27 chapters and growing about the Holocaust and genocide. And it's free for any teachers, any students, any educators of any kind who want to use it. I can put the link in the chat. But my work is both in teaching and in developing this resource.
And where were your parents and grandparents from?
They were from Budapest, Hungary, and my father was. My mother was American born, although I think her grandparents were Hungarian, just not survivor generation. And my father was with his sister and their parents. They all four survived. I learned from Irene Butter, they're called exchange Jews, which means they were in a camp in Bergen-Belsen in particular, and they were released before the end of the war in the fall of 1944 in two different transports. So they made it out to Geneva, and in 1948 they were fortunate to be allowed to come to the U.S. My father passed in the 70s, my grandmother in the 80s, and my aunt fairly recently. So I don't have as much direct oral history as I would like, but I'm learning, and I am real interested in talking with people about all the issues related to the Holocaust and genocide.
Okay, and I'm going to go up to you, Ava, and then I'm going to ask you, will it be okay to tell us a little bit of our mutual history and how we learned about each other after you speak?
Yes, please.
All right, go ahead.
My name is Ava Zaid Sarkissian, and both of my parents were survivors. My mom was from Czechoslovakia and my dad from Poland. My dad was in labor camps for 5 years. He was in the groups of boys that they took from Poland early in the war, I guess at sometime in 1939. And my mom went to Auschwitz with her father and probably four siblings. None of the siblings survived that went to Auschwitz, or her father, but she did have one sister that had been hiding in the forests with her husband because she was a little bit older and had already been married. So she survived and ended up in Russia, and then later went to Israel. So they got to see each other after 35 years. And I also got to know her and my cousins. So that was really special. My dad ended up having 3 siblings survive out of a family of 6 or 7 children. And none of the other, well, I should say 3 out of all of those family members survived. And they all ended up, 3 ended up in Sweden, 1 ended up in Argentina. And the one in Argentina came to San Diego via my parents bringing them through, the immigration process. And my uncle and aunt that were in Sweden stayed in Sweden and lived there. My parents were there, came to the United States to San Diego. And that's how I was born in San Diego. And both my parents have been gone for, I think, 11 or 12 years now. They died 4 months apart. And that's it. And then Jeffrey and I have a special story that he's going to tell you.
And so this is part of the reason why I wanted to do the Havurah, so we have time to talk about family and connections.
Yeah.
I never really wanted anything to do about the Holocaust. In fact, I ran away from the Holocaust for my whole life, and I've suffered trauma, inherited trauma that I didn't know I even had since I was in the 5th grade. And so when we moved in 2019 from Minneapolis to San Diego, my wife, Myra, we've been married over 36 years and knew each other for 4 years before that, has been an active leader in the Jewish community and has been taken leadership positions in many institutions in her career. she was anxious to get back into the Jewish community in San Diego. And so we went to a, I'm going to tell the long version of the story, Ava, so if you don't mind.
I don't
At
mind.
least, at least lets people know. So we went to a Shabbat function at the JCC here in La Jolla, California. And we met a woman who was sitting knitting, and she wanted to come early. We got there early, and my wife Myra can talk to a flagpole, so she started talking to Freddie. Freddie started talking to Myra, and before you know it, Freddie said, "Is one or both of you as second gen?" And Myra pointed to me, and I looked at Myra with dagger eyes, and I said, "Don't you dare start to get me involved in a second generation group." So, because I had nothing to do with it. So, she happened to say that that particular Sunday was a special meeting, a social meeting for the group. It was called In Mama's Kitchen, and it was designed to be able to bring one of your mother's dishes to the group. And I went reluctantly, Myra dragging me by my nose to go. And first person Freddie introduced me to was Ava. And Ava and I started chatting. And I said to Ava, where's your mother from? And she said, Košice, Czechoslovakia. I said, looked at Myra, and I said, Košice, Czechoslovakia? My mom is from Košice, Czechoslovakia. And then I said to Ava, I said, what was your mother's last name, maiden name? And she said, Friedman. I looked at Myra and I said, you're not going to believe this. My mother's maiden name was Friedman. Ava calls over to her older sister, Ida, who was there as well. And she says, Ida, what was mom's maiden name? She said, it was Friedman. You know that, Ava. And then Ava asks, well, what was the next question she asked? So she said, well, the long story is
you gave them the punchline before.
I know I can't tell.
Anyways, we decided that day that we are related.
Yes, we didn't need Ancestry or 23andMe. We immediately put a stamp of Ancestry. And now, other than my sister here in the United States, I have no family. But now with the Ava, Ida, and Henry in San Diego, I have grown my family 3x. So I am so excited to, and Ava's a big proponent of Holocaust education. We also share a membership in the second generation Shoah group here in San Diego, and with 120 other people. So it's been a really interesting, and that meeting was really the cause. In 2008, my sister got my parents to write a life document about their survivor status. And I never could open that document for the reasons that I mentioned early on. I came home and couldn't sleep because I got so excited about this whole thing that was happening, meeting 50 people who were second gen. Some parents mine never talked about the Holocaust. Some people talked about the Holocaust. Some parents did, some didn't. That evening at 3 o'clock in the morning, I opened those documents for the very first time. And I read my parents' documents. And would you believe it? In my mother's document, she omitted any discussion from 1942 to 1945. So my father gave a full accounting of what happened to him, but my mother refused to speak, and she refused to speak in that document. So that's a little more background about myself. So I'm going to switch over to Zola. So Zola, any stories you want to tell us, go ahead, tell us a little bit about your background. And she's so kind to always come from Cape Town, South Africa. And nice. Zola is doing our next program in March on the 19th. It's a special program as well.
So hello, everybody, familiar faces and new ones. Both my parents were from Wilna in then Poland, and they were in the Wilna ghetto, and my mother was a Yiddish singer, and she became known as the Wunderkind of the Wilna ghetto because she was always in the leading role and singing the songs. Her brother Leib Rosenthal was a very famous poet and satirical writer. He also wrote for Yiddish puppet theater before the ghetto. And he wrote a lot of songs, and he was one of the most prolific writers with 3 or 4 others who wrote the musical reviews in the ghetto. So music really kept them alive and saved them and so many others post-war. And after the war, after the liberation, which this year is the 80th anniversary of the liquidation of the Vilna ghetto. And my uncle Leib, unfortunately, was sent off to a camp in Estonia, and he was killed in Camp Kluga. And he even continued to write songs in the concentration camp as well. After the war, my mother wrote down all his songs and some of the others that she remembered from the Vilna ghetto in a little book that we as children only discovered after she died, because my mother also did not talk about her experiences. But my father did. And he was a journalist, so he kept lots of documents, and he wrote articles in the newspaper, and he spoke for 6 hours in the Spielberg Foundation testimony. And after the war, when they met, my mother continued to perform across Europe with Yiddish theater in the displaced persons camp. And it was Molly Picon who discovered her and helped to get her out of Poland after the war, and made their way to France. And then she was invited to South Africa to perform in Yiddish theater. And so that's how they got to South Africa. That's the summary. I had an older sister, 8 years older. It was just the 2 of us. And she was really the torchbearer of the history, the family history. So she wrote a book, and she wrote a musical about their lives. And she would teach Holocaust programming and travel the world. And she actually went to Vilna in 2003 and performed on the same stage. She did her show in Yiddish on the same stage in the Vilna Ghetto Theater that my mother had performed all those years before. And I was not interested in the whole Holocaust story like Jeffery, like many others, because she was doing it. We had it, the Holocaust was the 4th member of our family, but it was, for me, more personal. I was nurturing and caring for the parents, as opposed to my sister, who was teaching the world about the Holocaust. She died in 2009, and my mom also passed away at age 54. So it's only in the last 10 years, really, that I have taken on more of, now I sing in Yiddish and share their stories and share their songs and delve more into second generation stuff.
So I knew you were going to be on here. So would I embarrass you if I played something? And maybe you can help me by
Sure.
Introducing Hirtsitsu.
Okay, so as I said, only in the last few years did I start to get more involved in Holocaust education, and I was asked to find some music and sing at the Yom HaShoah commemoration in 2019 with the school children from the Jewish Day School. And instead of going to find some music to sing, I decided it was time to write something. So I wrote my first English and Yiddish song as a tribute to my parents, to my uncle, and to all survivors, to all our families lost, and as a promise to future generations to basically say, listen, hört sich zu, we will remember you.
Hold on a second, guys.
And is this the one you're playing? Then I'm honored to say that this is recorded by someone I didn't even know, who heard it and wanted to teach it to the LA Jewish community children. Rabbi Michelle Green.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Sorry, hold on a second. So thank you, Zola, for all these. Every time I hear that, I shed a tear. So it's a beautiful, beautiful situation.
Thank you.
I want to turn over to Mark. And Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story and tell us a little bit about the books that you're writing?
You always give me a tough act to follow. Zola, I have tears in my eyes. I literally do. That was just absolutely amazing. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Newhouse, and I had the privilege of speaking to this group a number of months ago. I share Jeffrey's story and Zola's story that my parents really did not talk very much at all about the Holocaust, just enough to give me terrible nightmares. And recently, I found a poem that I'd written when I was about, I guess, maybe 14 years old. And I think maybe you'll understand why, as a young boy, I did not really question my parents very much, and how, I guess, like Jeffrey, my interest in my background really began as an accident. This is called When Do the Train Dreams Stop? And when most boys think of trains, they are so excited. They want to play with the trains. This is a slightly different point of view. When do the train dreams stop? Always bringing a new crop, crowded in the cattle cars, branded with yellow stars. Standing room only, trains never end. Families scattered, no word of friends. Mothers, sons, fathers, and daughters riding blind to the slaughter. There is no one coming back from the other end of the railroad track. When do the train dreams stop? When millions of stars from heaven drop, I hear the endless clickety-clack as the hellbound trains each night, empty, roar back. When you have nightmares like that,
We lost your mic. We lost your mic. Somehow we lost your audio. Did you hit? Yeah, you're unmuted. You're on mute, Mark. So let's unmute yourself. There you go.
were you able to hear the poem?
Yes.
When you have nightmares like that, you don't ask questions. And my parents had me 2 years and 1 day after Mom was freed from Auschwitz. We came to the United States about 6 months later. They had spent most of their lives in Lodz, pronounced Łódź, Poland. I knew almost nothing about Łódź, as I've said before. I thought it was Anatevka in Fiddler on the Roof. And the only thing I really knew was that my parents had been in the Holocaust, and they had lost their parents, and my mother had lost a number of her siblings. I didn't even know their names. After my mother passed away, she had given me a book, and I found it when I was about to put it in a thrift store pile. And it was the chronicle of the ghetto. And I sat down with that book for 3 days, astonished at what I learned. I had never even heard of the leader of the ghetto, a man by the name of Chaim Rumkowski. And as I've said in my talks, I was so moved by what I was learning about my past, because most of my early life was a mystery to me, that I had to learn more. And so I started doing research. And finally I said, I feel guilty because my children won't know anything about this unless I do something about it. So I began to write. And in 30 days, I wrote about 700 pages on my computer. It was really as if the spirits of my dead relatives were writing the book through me. And I was still not convinced to share it with anybody except my family. But then I gave it to other people to read, and they said, Mark, you have to publish this. And after I entered it into a contest, it won several very important awards, including an international competition. And I'm proud to say that my books, The Devil's Bookkeepers, have just hit 500 reviews on Amazon. That doesn't count reviews from other places, but more important than the numbers are the kinds of reviews. And Zola, when I saw those children singing, I thought of one very special review. And that was, someone wrote that after I read your book, I could hear the heavenly chorus of thousands and thousands of children singing. So those kinds of reviews touch my heart. And I will now tell you that we are now working on a television limited series based on the books. And it's a long shot, but you know what? It's something I have to try. And I'm just very, very grateful for all I'm learning from this group. And Jeffrey, I love you very much for inviting me to the group and to share my story. The only thing I can tell you is that I have learned so much from everybody here. And the hardest part for me is not sitting here and crying when I hear something like what I just heard with those wonderful children singing, because they're keeping the memory alive. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Zola.
Right. And you know, Mark, you never blow your own horn. So for everyone on the video and who's going to be hearing this, Mark was the Educator of the Year in New York State. He's been a longtime teacher, and his passion for education comes through every time I have any connection to Mark. So thanks for being here. Ruth, you're going to be introducing yourself to me. I don't really recall you attending anything in the past, so I want to say hello and thank you for coming. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about you, your parents, where you're located, and any thoughts that you want to add.
Yes, thank you very much, Jeffrey. And I'm also getting over my tears. So I live in San Francisco. Sorry.
I know, it's okay. You can take time. It's a highly emotional topic.
Thank you, Zola. I've come to this quite late because I spent a career working with UNICEF and WHO, the World Health Organization, around the world. And that was such a demanding job that I missed the whole 2G thing. And now I'm much older and it's hitting me. So I have maybe you could call it a lighter past related to the Holocaust, but it doesn't feel light for our family. I live in San Francisco. We grew up in Geneva, Switzerland. Our father was a Holocaust survivor. The family was from the Rhineland in Germany. They, of course, had to leave. My grandmother and her family were on the St. Louis. My great-grandmother died in Auschwitz. I discovered on VIEWseum's website, and I have been trying, I think I'm the family memory keeper. I have written an article that was published about our grandfather who was a winemaker and what it was like to be a Jewish winemaker in Germany during the Nazi years. I've written a book, but I see there's a lot of authors here, and I'm duly impressed with Mr. Newhouse and what all of you are doing. So I am looking at the food, the way that our culinary heritage, how did food help keep our family together, and specifically a cheesecake that our great-grandmother, the one who died in Auschwitz, made, and how we're still making it 100 years later, and how is that experience of being around the table something that restored our family and kept us going. So I am just belatedly again welcoming. I've never had the chance to be in contact with people who've had this experience, and for whatever reason, I'm the chosen one in my self-chosen one to be a memory keeper. So that's why I'm here. I also can't stay maybe till the end. I don't know how long it is, but I'm grateful to you, Jeffrey, for initiating this. And I don't, if there's anybody in the San Francisco area who's doing what you're doing, I'd love to learn it. And my thanks to everybody for what you are doing and sharing in the memory keeping department.
Oh,
I am interested maybe to just add one point. there's sort of feels like there may be a hierarchy of suffering in the Holocaust, you know, like people who just have the most dreadful stories, and is ours not so bad because we only had a couple of relatives die in the Holocaust? Because I know neither my father nor my aunt could ever forgive, and it's that it's so that issue of the degree to which your family is affected and how you're viewed in the Holocaust community as a result is of interest to me, because I struggle with that.
Well, Ruth, I just sent you a text to everyone. So since you're interested in food, there's 2 books that I recommend. Both of them have done programs with me, Cara De Silva, called Hidden Recipes, Hidden Memories. And it's about how survivors in Terezin shared recipes.
Yes, if I can just say, I've met Cara. She passed away actually.
Yes, just recently passed away, yes.
Yeah.
And then also Eva Maremi, who's from Minneapolis, wrote a beautiful book called Hidden Recipes, a memoir. So I easily can introduce you to her. And yes, in the Bay Area is a gentleman who just recently published his book called Peter Kupfer, and he did Glassmaker's Son.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
very
you.
good. All right, next up is my friend, survivor, Jackie Gamache. You're up next. Come on.
Thank you for the gamache. Okay, hi all of you. I have met some of you, and I am totally I don't know how to introduce myself. Usually I say, go Google. I'm developing a program. We are the Tree of Life. I have been an educator in many fields for 63 years in many countries. But let's, if you don't mind, Jeffrey, let's not take it about me, but Zola and Mark and all of you, I would like to say it's so touching to hear your story. And I have said that at many of my introductions. How can we work together? How can we get involved? And if I address you, Zola, if I may call you Zola, is We Are the Tree of Life is englobes what you are doing and how you can complement my efforts by contacting me and working with my team and us working with your team. Mark, it's the same thing. You are an educator for so many years. You know about education. You are producing a book, which already I'm sure is going to be essential. That means my motivation today, my motivations, I don't know if you can say that in English today, or my motivation has 2 aspects. One, it's the partnership to get as much as we can together. We all know about the Tree of Life, and I'm calling it, we are the Tree of Life. That means, in a sense, I see each individual or each organization as part of a leaf of the tree or as part of a branch of the tree. And I am pushing that because with determination, because what happened today is terrible. What happened today is awful. It's like we individuals, we have learned nothing. We have those genocide, we have those horrors, and at the same time, we have this word of resilience, this word of courage, and this word of hope and love. That means I am taking a direction that I want you, only one, you to share with you, because it's not easy, but from the story of the Holocaust and the horror of the Holocaust, I am getting very slowly to the world of Ukraine. No politics. I'm not interested in politics. I don't know about politics, but I think about all those people who are suffering. And for example, one event that We Are the Tree of Life is planning today, which is going to be live, it's to be at our Balboa Park, where we have an open theater with 3,500 seats. And I am trying to have the Jewish community at large supporting the House of Ukraine who is going to have this concert on the 24th of February, and hoping that you were talking about music. Can, with music, give them some peace, give them some less trauma, or I don't know. The other thing that I want to mention is I am not a psychiatrist, I am not a psychologist, I'm just an educator. 63 years, many fields, as I said. And I think we have to take those disciplines that we have today and bring some peace. And one of them, I'm developing a program that we call From Post-Traumatic Disorder to Post-Traumatic Growth with VIEWseum. And it's going to be live, and I don't know anything about trauma, or yes, I do know about trauma because I have lived my little trauma. That means, please, thank you to Jeffery for organizing those Havurah and Havurot with the intent of working together and improving each of us what we are trying to achieve.
And you're up next, Havurah. And Havurah is also a survivor. And she's recently kind of leaned forward and told her story. So why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Thank you for calling me a survivor. I do not call that of myself. I call myself a keeper of the flame. My grandparents, Fritz and Ida, were murdered in Treblinka. My parents got out of Czechoslovakia after Kristallnacht, but before the Nazis took over Czechoslovakia, because my dad was born in Reichenberg, the Sudetenland. So he somehow became a German citizen and somehow was able to use that 3-month period between October 39 and October 38 to January. They left in January of 39 for America, and somehow my dad was able to get permission to come to America. The rest of the family did not. They lived in liberal Czechoslovakia. They didn't believe what was happening. Anyway, I was born in 1942 in Northampton, Massachusetts, 2 weeks after my grandparents were murdered in Treblinka. My mother found out when I was 3. She got a telegram in 1945 from the one surviving cousin, telling her what happened to everybody, and that she herself was the only survivor. And she had survived by somehow escaping from a train that was on its way to Auschwitz. The Russians had bombed the tracks, and she and 3 other prisoners had somehow gotten behind. She said gotten under the train. That sounds, anyway, she escaped. And she was then the messenger for the family. And she was also my mother kept in touch. And I forced my mother in 1990, when my mother was already 78 years old, to take me to Prague to visit Goethe. My mother kept saying she didn't want to go back to see Stones. You know, the family wasn't there. And I would say, but Goethe. And she would not want to do it. But she gave me 5 days in Prague. And we get to the Prague Jewish Cemetery, where we know that her grandfather, my great-grandfather, is buried. His name is Emanuel Schlosser. We get to the gravestone, and to her surprise and my amazement, it doesn't only say Emanuel Schlosser, but engraved on his stone, next to his parents in community, are the names of the 14 members, the direct members of my mother's family who perished in the Holocaust. She does not know who engraved those names, but it made a big impression on her. It was somehow healing. It was somehow, now she knew why I forced her to come. And there was a bench next to this gravestone where I am imagining my children, my grandchildren, who knows if they were ever going to get to Czechoslovakia or the cemetery, but in my mind. So the great-great-grandparents, then the grandparent, anyway, it's that we're connecting the generations. And I spoke about seeing that, that image, that gravestone with those names. I spoke about that in a Jewish storytelling group organized by Jennifer Ruddick-Sunikoff for Teach the Shoah. And I sent Jeffrey the link. It's like a 10-minute description of that moment of sort of connecting the broken part, the Czech part, and the future part. So that's one thing. The other thing, in connection to listening to Zola, you stirred in me a tremendous emotion, and I'm very grateful. It made me think about a time when, so I lived in Israel for 16 years. Part of my healing journey to connect myself to the broken part of myself was to move to kibbutz Gesher Aziv in Israel, where I lived for 16 years. And so my husband is a singer, and he was drafted into the Israeli army, and he was serving in Lebanon. But he had also been asked to sing at the Holocaust memorial ceremony at Kibbutz Lochamei Ghettoot, which is the kibbutz, the museum for ghetto fighters. That's located not that far from our kibbutz. But he was now in Lebanon. And he got permission from the army to come and sing. But somehow the permission and the transport didn't quite work together. So he now had permission, but he was he was half an hour into Lebanon. And he felt this need to go sing this Yiddish song. So he hitchhiked. He was an Israeli soldier in Lebanon with this Uzi over his shoulder, and he's hitchhiking in Lebanon for the purpose of getting to sing at Kibbutz Lochamei Ghettoot for Yom HaShoah. I've actually asked him to sing me that song, and he sort of doesn't remember it, but I hope he does remember it and does perform it, because it was so meaningful to him at the time. I'm afraid I missed that. I usually go to the memorial, but because of this story, he was going straight from Lebanon to that memorial. Anyway, thank you, Zola, for reminding me of that amazing memory.
And Havurah, I'm always looking for guest artists for the program. So if you can convince your husband to remember how to sing it, I want you to bring him as a guest and perform it on our group. You have a date. You just have to execute. All right. So next up is Sammy. Sammy's a survivor. He's in New York, outside of Brooklyn, I think, or somewhere in New York. And I love the red Rutgers shirt. That's a North Jersey. I'm from Allentown, Pennsylvania originally, so that Rutgers is close by. We competed at Temple University against Rutgers in the football. So welcome, Sammy, and tell us a little about yourself. Let's need to keep it a little short, but go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, Jeff. I love your program. Just like most of you, but just like Mark, I do not know anyone from my family. The only thing that I knew is from my father's side, from 42 people, only 2 survived. Just like Mark, I did not ask questions. Obviously, until the Eichmann trial, Holocaust survivors did not talk publicly, definitely not to the children. They wanted the children to have a normal childhood. And my life changed in 2003 when I was at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. It closed its door to the general public for 2 days. And it opened it up only to the Holocaust survivors, their children, and their liberators. There were over 8,000 people. And at the table where I was sitting, I met the men born in the same city, been in the same camp, the same years, 41, 44. He was deported when he was 8 months old. I was deported when I was a year and a half. By the way, we were deported by the Romanians, not by the Germans. Like all of you, we all went through ups and downs, but there was one thing that I never had in my life, and I never had an extended family. So besides my parents, I met only my uncle very, very briefly, but that was all. So I live alone. I am one of the 1/3 of the Holocaust survivors that live under the poverty line in the United States. In New York, there are 30,000 survivors. 40% of them live under the poverty line. It's unconscionable. Well, I don't need, when I give my presentations, obviously I talk about it. I talk about my life. I talk about everything. I'm very, very open. And when they want to give me money, I said, I don't want money. I have a foundation, give it to the foundation, but I do not want money. I don't do it for a living. And my mission in life is to educate the next generation. So just to give you 2 things that I am very proud of. I don't know how it happened, why it happened. I don't think of myself as being a celebrity, but apparently people have heard me speak and they know me. But I've been invited to go to Nashville, Tennessee, to speak to the national evangelical radio station. They will give me an hour and a half to interview me. They have a very, very large audience. And at the same time, I've been invited also to be interviewed by Google. I'm laughing because it's beyond my wildest dreams, but I am very, very honored. And I don't know if you have heard of BBYO, Brit Youth Organization. So I'm flying Friday, I'm flying to Dallas to their international convention. There will be over 3,000 students from about 45 different countries. This will be my 4th time, so I'm looking forward to it.
What sweatshirt are you going to wear at that conference?
Say it again?
What sweatshirt are you going to wear at that conference?
Oh, no, the shirt? I'm going to, hold on a second.
It pays to know everyone, and I get inside of their heads, so I have the ability to ask the unusual questions. So
Yeah, okay, I'm just going to take it out. 1 second. I'm just bring up my shirt and show.
And Anne, if you're
I
listening,
don't know if you can see it, hope because of the background. Okay.
what's it say?
Israel Air Force. I served there. Okay, and that's what I want to show.
You know, my father served.
I'm very proud. I'm very proud of being Israeli. And in my presentations, the one thing that I do, and I think that we should also do it, is instead of emphasizing my story, which is as compelling as it may be, it's a personal story. I go through the stages that since we did not take the appropriate actions and timely, it just escalated until it came to a point of return. So I talk about the history. How did it happen? How is it possible that ordinary people from Germany, from Europe, from other countries found it not only acceptable, but required to annihilate one group of people, of the Jewish people? So that is something that I do differently. And the other things that I also do, which I like, when I go to schools, I am just a guest. I do not give the presentation. I empower the young people, okay, to be the moderators. As a matter of fact, I had a seventh grader moderating in front of 400 students, an 11th grader moderating in front of 1,200 students. So my goal is to empower them to become
All right, I have one question for you, Sammy.
leaders.
What year?
Yes.
What year did your father? What year were you in the Air Force in Israel, or was it Palestine?
62, 65. 62, 65.
Just to have a further connection with you, my father was in the Haganah Air Force in the War of Independence in 1948. He made propellers.
Wow.
So
Wow.
we have something else in common.
Yeah.
So
I worked at the most sophisticated plane that Israel had at that time that was used in the 6-Day War. I was basically on that base that we worked on that plane, and that was the Mirage 3C. I was the first in the first class in Israel that learned about that plane, Mirage 3C.
nice.
The first class in Israel.
Okay, thanks, Sam. And next up is Judith, and then I'll get to you, Anne. So just relax. You don't have to get on screen. You can still stay where you are.
And right now,
Wait, Sammy, I'm going to stop you. I'm sorry. I'm giving it over to Judith. Thanks.
Yes, very good.
Sammy, that was really great. Everybody so far. I'm sorry I'm late. My computer did this huge crash thing, and I have things up all over my computer. I have to call Apple now. It's a mess. Anyway, but I made it. I'm here, even in the middle of the mess. But and Zola, it's so great to see you. It's such a sweetheart, and the rest of you too. So I just got information that the Sousa Mendez, is that how you pronounce it? SOUSA, Sousa Mendez Foundation. They're having a big event, and they're showing this film of my cousin Arthur Ziegelbaum at the event, and about the hero of the Warsaw Ghetto and everything he did. And they're going to have the head of the Judd Newborn, who's, I don't know, he was the head of the museum, and a woman from the Anne Frank Foundation is co-sponsoring it. I should send the announcement to you, but my sister sent it to me because there's this big picture of our cousin, and you know, it's like, it's shocking every time I see him, his picture. I get a shock in my body because, you know, it's my family, and I just anyway, you know, I don't know if you know about him, but he was, I have an essay about a published article about him on academia.edu. It's called Arthur Ziegelbaum, Hero of the Warsaw Ghetto. And I summarized a lot of things about his life. There's biography of him written, Der Koach zu sterben, the courage to die. And there's a book, also another book about him. And I got together a lot of information from different sources, and I wrote this article. And a lot of people go on academia.edu and they research and they find the article. So I'm glad that people all over the world are learning more about him. But he was an amazing person who his parents' granary, whatever they had, a huge, they were wealthy, and everything got burned up. And then he was a little boy. He had no education, completely self-educated. He ended up becoming in charge of they passed a law from some Treaty of Versailles that Jews could be in the trade, have a trade. That was, I think, in 1922 or something like that. I can't remember all the dates. But he was in charge of then going to all the shtetls and educating these people. You could be a shoemaker. I mean, people were starving in the shtetls. So he went around everywhere, and he had a newsletter about Velva, who could now join a trade and everything. So he became a member of the Polish government. And he came up from nothing. Everything was self-educated. And he was very active in theater, and you name it, he was in it. And so he became the leader of the underground in the Warsaw Ghetto. And the Germans were aware of him. They were watching him. And so the underground smuggled him out. So he was a member of the Polish government in exile, representative of the Polish government to the free world. So he went around to the United States, to London, everywhere, trying to get support for us. And everything, doors were all closed to him. And so he was in communication with Jan Karski. I don't know if he was a Pole. People know a lot about him. He was bringing messages from what's going on in Poland in the Warsaw Ghetto to Arthur. So a message was delivered to Arthur, who at that time was living on Bond Street in England and broadcasting on the BBC. And the message was, you have to do everything, including giving up, the underground says, everything, including giving up your own life. And there's an interview on YouTube with Jan Karski saying, he was like disturbed. He said, what do you mean give up my life? Oh, I'm going to stand in the middle of London and I'm going to kill myself. They're just going to say he's insane. What is all this? What can I do? Anyway, it ended up that he wrote this scathing letter to all the allied nations of the world. And he did take his own life, not in public, but he took his own life. And the letter to these allied nations was kept by Poland for, I think, 50 years. Finally, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum got that letter, installed it on the third floor, which is the final solution floor of the museum. And they had a big ceremony honoring Arthur and our family. And he received the highest medal of honor from Poland, given to him by the country of Poland posthumously at that ceremony. So we were there, and my mother, who was very close to him, his father and my grandmother were brother and sister, and he watched over my mother. And because she had a gorgeous voice, he brought her. She became an orphan. Her father was assassinated by a Polish general when she was in the womb, and then her mother died. She was a young girl, a teenager, and Arthur took her to the Hazimir of Lodz, which was the premier choir of Jewish choir that sang with all the symphonies and did opera in Yiddish. They did La Traviata, everything in Yiddish, and she became a member. Arthur was, of course, very influential. He brought her there. She was the youngest one. They called her she was the little Pizzala, and she was there. And of course, when the Nazis came, that was the end of everything. But we have this relationship, and everybody was from Chelm. And maybe the only thing you ever knew about Chelm was that the book about the joke about the Shalom Aleichem, the wise men of Chelm, making jokes. But Chelm is where Hasidism originated, and the rabbis there, it was a seat of learning and great scholarship. My grandfather, which was my mother's father, he was a chassid of the Rebbe of Lublin, and he was in Chelm. Well, Arthur's family was also in Chelm. We were all family, but he went more into the more liberal side of Judaism. That's why he brought my mother to that choir, because as a chassid, a woman would not be able to sing in a choir with men and women, you know. So we had the more liberal side and the Orthodox side. Everybody was together. There was no contention. And one time my mother wrote that there was a time in Chelm when her brothers, my uncles, all of whom perished in the Holocaust, there were rabbis, that they saved Arthur from the Polish police. Something was going on at the time. He was always getting people together for various things, and they carried him away on their shoulders from the Polish police. So somehow the whole family always gravitated to us. And so in the United States, all the siblings Arthur's siblings would come from all over the world to our house. And people would say, why are they coming to you? And so there's history there of this relationship of my uncles, you know, helping him. And so when they all gathered together for one final portrait when they were already older, and they came to New York, and Fievel Ziegelbaum, who wrote the book, Der Kosch is Starving, he put me in the picture with all the siblings of Arthur, and he said, you look like Arthur's daughter, and you're one of us, and I want you in the picture. And so in the book is the picture of all the siblings and me. And it's like, wow. And then, so, you know, we were intertwined, and at this big ceremony in Washington, my mother sang this song, Ghetto, in Yiddish, which she had learned in the DP camp from Arthur's brother, actually. And you know, the whole, it's heartbreaking. I mean, he was
Judith, can I interrupt you for a second?
He was a force of life, and he died. And there are memorials for him everywhere, all over Poland. They just made a statue in Chelm. They made a bench with Arthur sitting on a bench. It's like, I'm like cringing. Anyway,
Judith,
you know,
Judith, hold on a second.
Yes.
Please tell us who Judith is, because you haven't. Yes.
Oh. I'm a clinical psychologist. It's Dr. Judith Tellerman. I have like a lot of history with, I was appointed by President Clinton to be an advisor to the federal government because of projects that I had done and a lot of work. I went back and forth to Washington for 7 years, advising the branch of the federal government that does mental health, substance abuse prevention. And I have this program I developed, which I got all the awards from the American Counseling Association, all the top awards for this program I developed, which is a counseling program to help children prevent destructive behaviors and help them learn to solve their problems. And that book chapter is also up on academia.edu. So I have a lot of credentials. You know, I'm a diplomate, and I'm, you know, fellow of the academy.
And where are you located?
I'm in Chicago, and I'm in private practice mainly, but I still have things going on here or there and everywhere. But
one of the things that you have going on is with Zola and Robin Bernstein on May 19th, and it's a great follow-up plug to have you.
Yes.
The three of you will be presenting the Songs of Survival, if I'm remembering the title correct. Am I right, Zola?
Yeah, whatever Zola
Remembrance of what's a, I'm sorry, hold on one second. I'll tell you in 1 second, so I get the title right for everyone. Hold on.
I think it's Remembrance Through Song and Art or something.
Yes,
Good.
through art and remembrance through art and song. Thank you, Zola.
And the thing I didn't say is I'm a cantorial soloist, and so that's what's going to be going on at this presentation with Zola. She's an amazing musician and singer and composer, and I don't even know everything but she's amazing. And I also write songs, and I have many YouTube videos about songs about the Tanakh. And I also have archived recorded songs that my mother brought to me that were archived that nobody knew about, and now they're on YouTube. A song about the Balfour Declaration, and a song, a yahrzeit song that the Hazimir sang to the melody of the funeral. Anyway, you'll see certain things on YouTube. Okay, enough about me.
Okay, I want to just say that both Zola and Judith and Mark have done a obligation of memory interview series with me, which is both on the YouTube channel for jcrnow.com, and we have a new website at jcrnow.com, as well as the VIEWseum, which is our museum. So waiting patiently in the wing, and that's because Anne has eye problems. She can't be on screen, but she certainly can speak to us. So Anne Gorski is also from San Diego and a colleague, a member of the second generation group here as well. And hi, Anne, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself. Go ahead. You have to unmute yourself.
Can hear
please.
you. Can you?
There you go.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I was born in Munich after the war in '48, and both my parents were survivors. My father survived the Warsaw Ghetto, and he would talk about it anytime I asked him questions. He didn't burden me with it, but anytime I was interested, he was glad I had an interest, and he was happy to talk to me about his experiences. He said when he left the ghetto, he thought he was the last Jew alive. He was hiding in bunkers in the ghetto. And I remember him once telling me how he found a can of, lard or Crisco, like lard, and how he basically ate it to, because whatever there was hidden in different areas, he was scurrying about in the ghetto. He was able to eat, or he would eat. And he was married, he had a wife and 2 children, and nobody survived of his family. After he left the ghetto, he escaped at night. He went over some barbed wire, and he had a contact, and he knew a woman. There was a woman that basically kept him in her apartment, and he was hiding there basically after the ghetto. I'll just tell one quick story. Somebody informed that they thought she might be keeping somebody, and the Germans came to the door and they knocked on the door, and my father was hiding in this, I guess they had like a clothes hamper, and in this closet, and I guess they were big hampers. And they had just eaten something, he and this woman. And the Germans said, "You live alone, right?" And she said, "Yes." He said, "Well, why are there 2 plates on the table?" And she said, "Well, my cat some food for my cat." Anyway, they had long bayonets at the end of their rifles, and they basically ripped the place apart and took the bayonet. They opened the closet thing where he was hiding, and they stuck the bayonet into I don't know if we call it a bassinet. I don't know exactly what it was, but it missed him. So there are lots of stories like that, but he did survive. And my mother was a sole survivor also. So both of my parents basically survived alone in the world after the war. And my parents, I grew up in Milwaukee, and like I said, if I asked questions, my parents definitely told me things. And I can remember a moment of going to overnight camp and saying goodbye to my mother. And somehow I had a flash of a train, or the flash of what it must have been like for people to say goodbye to their parents. And I must have been 10 or 11. And I don't know that I knew much, except saying goodbye to your parents. For me, that was an emotional thing. So I know we're a little short on time, so I'm not going to go into the whole thing. So,
did you know? And did you know the Peltzes? Were you there in the 70s?
I did know the Peltz family, yes.
Because I lived there. Okay, I was there from 68 to 83. I lived in Milwaukee.
I knew the Peltzes. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Very good.
The survivor community. Yep.
That's a very small. It's a really small community, and I want to give Naomi. I see you have now nice connections sitting next to Tibor, and I wanted to give you an opportunity, if you choose to share a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I am a Holocaust survivor. Believe it or not, I was 14 months old when my parents, my two brothers, one brother was 1 month old, my other brother was 3 years old. We went to hiding. And when I was 22 months old, war ended and I survived the war. But when they went to hiding, my father took my brothers and they went about 15 kilometers, about 10 miles, walking to hiding, and they left me behind by myself, 1-year-old baby. And my father came back to me the same day, and Germans were knocking on the door, and superintendent was saying, I heard them leaving. I know that they left. And they were saying, and my father put pillow on my face that I wouldn't be crying. And they were saying, okay, we are going to throw grenades there. And the superintendent was saying, don't do it because you are going to ruin my house. And those Germans left, and my father took me to safety. And after 7 months in hiding, I'm here.
And where were you born, and where were you hiding?
I was born in, it was called Slovak Fascist Republic, and I was born in Bratislava. Now it is capital of Slovakia. And I didn't know that there was a war, because we went into school. They didn't tell us that it was a war against the Jews. It was a war against the Slovaks. And when I was 14 years old, somebody asked me, how come you are alive? And I told them, why shouldn't be alive? And I went home, and after my parents told me that we were Jew, I knew that we are Jewish. We were always Jews, but I didn't know that it was a war against the Jews. And after I got married to this guy, and
And how long have you been married?
55 years.
Beautiful.
And
you're still staying with him? Are you still staying with him after 55 years?
We are still smiling. You can see it. And my husband, he went through everything because he was 14 years old. He's still 14 years older, and he is going to talk to the show in a few weeks. And I learned everything about the war from him. When he was talking to schools, to universities, to organizations, and I learned everything what really happened to us.
Okay, well, thank you. So I'm going to the next part of the program, and I'm hoping that we'll conclude at 11. But I want to play something for you, which has really started me on another sort of pathway. So before I give it away, I want to just share it with you. It's only 2 minutes, and we'll jumpstart from there on another topic.
Yeah, it is there.
One thing that all those years bothers me, I never will know that how my mother really, when she died.
I've known about the concentration camps as long as I can remember. But I can honestly say I never used to think about it too much.
At first you just hear it, it's just a story, and it's not real. But then one day you realize that, hey, this really happened, and it was really my mother.
Do you remember your parents well?
Yes. And I love them. I love them both. They told us to take out the clothes, and nobody wanted to go into the showers because we knew the showers are gas.
It's so horrible that I can't really imagine.
As a matter of fact, I didn't even know that everybody's mother wasn't in a Holocaust.
As we walked into the camp,
immediately they took him to the gas chamber. When my children cried because they got hurt or because they didn't get what they wanted, I didn't hear or see my children. I saw them with them. I don't want to feel guilty that I have put a load on you because of my experiences.
No, you did. You did. You put a load on me.
It's obvious that it has something to do with who I am. I don't know to what extent it does.
I think I owe all my children an apology.
It's the guilt and your imagination, your fantasy about what might have happened and what might have happened to you. Totally different Holocaust stuff. What you're talking about is the Holocaust of the mind.
I don't know if you ever say that much.
So this film was called The Generation Apart, and you can find the film on Amazon Prime. I highly recommend it. It's a really emotionally interesting, but also warning, a little bit tough to get through it. And it's really the function of us as second generations discussing what it was like to grow up in your parents' home. And so my question, which I kind of pre-announced to the group through an email, was I'd like to have you think about and share with us what it was like to grow up in your survivor parents' homes. Now, both my parents were survivors. Mother from Auschwitz, my father left Nazi Germany at 15. We talked about parents letting their children go. My grandparents decided that after the Nuremberg laws in Germany, they saw the writing on the wall, and they decided to let my father go on the last kinder transport from the Hadassah Aliyat program with 100 teenagers through Italy and on to Port Haifa in Palestine. And he arrived there in 1936, early 36, and he was only 35. He met my mom my mom has a very interesting story, but what I wanted to share with you is both my parents, even though they went through their own Holocaust survivor situation, never really transferred that traumatic experience to my sister or I. My sister's 4 years older than I am. I'm 64. And however, ever since I can remember from the 5th grade, I have had Nazi nightmares, so bad that it would wake me up in the middle of the night. And so I never could understand what was going on since my parents never talked. And so my parents were very goal-oriented. Though they came to the United States in 1954, pregnant with my sister, never knew the language. They landed in Allentown, Pennsylvania. She was born there in 1954. I was born there in 1958. They didn't have a shekel to their name when they came here. They didn't speak any English, and they became very, very successful here in business. My father and my mother is my hero, both personally, and I turned out to be an entrepreneur like my parents were. So they were very goal-oriented. There was no way that I could not do well in anything that I achieved. My parents held very high standards for me, and I felt those standards. But I didn't have any trauma. I never saw my mother or father have nightmares or episodes or anything, but yet I suffered from this trauma. So I'm going to open it up to each of you. I'm only going to ask for volunteers. I will never call someone who doesn't want to speak. But if you do want to speak, you can either raise your hand using the emotions button, or you can we're not too big of a crowd, you can just raise your hand and speak. So my question to all of you is, what was it like to grow up in your parents' survivor homes? Who's going to be first, if at all?
You want me to be first?
All right, Zola, you made the first peep, so I'm giving you the credit.
So as a child, first of all, my parents were older than all my friends' parents. They spoke with foreign tongue. They couldn't speak English properly. But I always knew they were special. I didn't understand what the Holocaust was as a young child, but I knew my parents were survivors, which made them special. So that was one side. They were also very, very sensitive. My father would cry at TV shows or A Pretty Flower. My mother was an actress, so there was a lot of emotion and expression, and they were screaming and shouting and skipping and dancing when things were good, and loud noises and crying and histrionics, all of which I thought was normal and which apparently terrified my friends if they were expressive when they were around. I was not put a lot of pressure on as an achiever, but my sister was. She was 8 years older than me. She was the firstborn, so everything fell on her. But I did have a very strong work ethic because my father, there was never any downtime. You have to make use of every moment of every minute of day. And even if you were sick, you needed to be working. So he would bring me stamps to tear off envelopes if I was sick in bed, because he was a philatelist. So you must always be creating something or putting in effort and being productive. I used to get embarrassed a lot because my father would always want to take rolls from the restaurant home and ask the restaurant manager for more bread to take home. And as far as we knew, we could afford to buy rolls and afford to buy bread. So I never understood this. So that was one of the things that used to embarrass me. And when they would express very loudly in a movie, they would clap or they would shout out in joy or in horror, which nobody else in the Commonwealth of South Africa at that point, they were English trained and very polite. It was like really a strange family to be living in. As I said, my mother didn't speak about the Holocaust, but my father did. And also my father organized the Sherita Plata, which was an organization that was all the survivors were invited to be a part of, as to be a support for each other. So we had different groups of survivors. There were the Sephardim from Rhode Island that didn't always join the Sherita Plata group, and a big Galiciana and Litvak group. And then there was the German side of the survivors that also didn't necessarily join the Litvak group. You know, Jews, you must go to the shul that you don't go to. There was the stigma if you talk Yiddish, or we don't want to be Yiddish anymore, we want to be English and fit in. So there was a whole big mix, but eventually the groups came together as they got older. So the Sherita Plata always met in our home, and there were movies. They showed movies about the Holocaust. They spoke about their experiences. There was a lot of screaming and shouting in Polish and in Russian and in Yiddish. The Holocaust was always there, in present. As a child, my sister bore the brunt of the trauma more readily. She was sent to the school, the government school on Jewish holidays, where she was highly embarrassed because no Jewish children went to the school on Jewish holidays, even though it was a government school. What are you doing here? And my parents didn't know. So they would send her to camp without a sleeping bag. So there were a foreign immigrant story that would happen more so for her. I was let off easier. I'm trying to think of other little issues. My biggest trauma that I didn't know I had until later I understood was that every day that I had to go to school, I cried for about an hour or two. I did not want to go to school, and I cried for the first hour in school. And I didn't know why I was crying. This was age 6, 7, 8. It stopped when I was about 9 or 10 only. They used to call me crybaby. I used to say my father hit me when they asked, which was not true. I mean, he did hit me sometimes because apparently I did things wrong, but I didn't know that I did. But that's a different story. But I cried, I understood only later, was because I didn't want to leave my mother alone. She had lost her family. She didn't like to be by herself, even though she was this actress and happy-go-lucky person most of the time. At home, she was often quiet and played patience, little card games quietly in the corner, did her yoga when she wasn't on stage or playing bridge. She was very quiet and melancholy. And I got the message of my older sister every time she went out. It was, Nava, why are you going out? You must stay home. Why are you leaving me? So I got that message, I think. And I didn't want to leave her. And I think somehow I realized that she had lost all her family, that she was alone and didn't want to lose another part of family. And I only figured that out in therapy many, many years later. So that was, I think, my biggest trauma that I was aware of. The other thing is I don't leave home easily. In case something happens, I have to be ready. I have to be ready to take care of whoever needs taking care of or whatever needs taking care of. Food, there must be plenty food in my fridge. There has to be a second and a third one waiting in the wings so that we do not run out of food. And if someone likes something in the house, it gets a label on if that's the last piece so that that person can eat it and nobody else must eat it. And I think I got that from my father. He used to label some of his favorite things in the fridge so nobody else would eat it, God forbid. So my in case of taking care of is a huge one for me. Again, I didn't realize it was a post-traumatic, generational thing until I heard other 2Gs talking about it. That, if I'm entertaining or doing a concert in the night, I will not leave the house the whole day in case something should happen and then I'm not available for the stage show or I'm not available for something. But I'm not agoraphobic. It's an interesting dilemma. I could go on, but somebody else's turn now.
Well, Mark, you had your hand up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're following Zola again. Sorry.
That's all right. I love Zola and I don't mind at all that she is so wonderful and passionate because I feel I enjoy her. I enjoy everybody here. The truth is, my childhood was very, very strange, and it's still a mystery to me. My father was a total mystery. When he was home, he was a very sullen, very dark man. He was an only child. And I always thought the Holocaust is why he was so cruel and difficult to deal with. But we met someone who knew him when he was 11 years old and said he was always like that. I think the thing that I remember most is that he always taught me that we had to excel. He would always say a Jew has to do better than everybody else because when the Holocaust comes again, and he believed, I think with his whole heart, that in America there would be another Holocaust. And if he was alive today, I think he would be very, very, how can I put this to you? He would be almost in a panic about what he's been seeing with the hate and with the terrible divisiveness and all the things going on. And he'd be almost like a survivalist, and I think that's part of it. They were so driven by the need to survive and to excel. And that was imbued in me. And I have to tell you that I would have been a perfectionist. I am a perfectionist in myself. But when I became a classroom teacher, I realized that pushing my perfectionism on children was a terrible thing. And so I learned not to do that. My father never really did. And my mother was really the first female liberationist because he struggled against his power so much. He wouldn't let her drive. He wouldn't let her take a job. And she did all those things in secret. Okay. I will tell you this. I absolutely refused to carry aluminum foil in my purse. My mother and all her friends, they would go to a bar mitzvah wearing fur coats, shimmering gowns, and as soon as they got there, the pocketbooks would open up, the aluminum foil would come out, and before you knew it, there was nothing left on the tish. I guess really what saved my life, honestly, was teaching. Because I got from the kids that I worked with, I was a 5th grade and a 6th grade teacher. I also taught college, but I got from them the affection I never had as a child. And I have over 1,000 of my former 5th and 6th grade students on Facebook with me now, and I'm retired 23 years. I think that's some kind of a Guinness Book of World Records. But I think one thing that happened too is the experience I had as a child with the Holocaust shadowing me made me extremely sensitive to injustice, to bullying, and to the child who needed help. And I think that's why I have so many students with me still after 23 years, because they knew I cared. And maybe that's what we have to do. We have to show that the Holocaust turned us into caring people. And maybe that's the secret of how to pass that on. So, you know, all these years I've sort of resisted going into schools because I knew so little. But maybe that's what we have to do, show that we care, not just about the Holocaust, but as I've said before, but as a Holocaust of all the hate that we see in the world today. Because I know when I hear about what's going on in Michigan State, in New York City, in Ukraine, as safe as I feel in my gated community in the villages in Florida, my heart breaks. And I feel that the caring is what makes us, the second generation and the first generation, that's what makes us so special, that we have that caring, that we're willing to put in time even for a meeting like this. Because you know what? That's what it really is all about, the caring. Boy, do I sound corny, right?
Not at all. Michael, go ahead. I'm glad you must find this interesting. You must find this interesting because you're staying with us. You didn't say you were going to be here so long.
I know. I was gonna go right a midterm. So I want to just echo what Mark just said, and also respect Mark for having thousands of Facebook following students. That's awesome. And the main message that he shared that I want to echo is about caring and resilience. So when we frame the Holocaust as a story of millions of victims, while it is true, it doesn't give us the story of all the resilience and resistance. And the resistance is now gaining traction as a narrative about, you know, what people did at the time. What I think survivors teach us, and this is for my own family as well, although in my family, you know, there were 3 survivors and they were all very different in how they approach things. But I don't want to dwell on that. I want to say that the resilience that Mark just spoke about is a different narrative than the narrative that is, well, correct, that there's a lot of trauma, a lot of suffering during and after the Holocaust. The resilience narrative, and it's one of the 3 R's in my textbook, remembrance, respect, and resilience, is really important. And when we look back as 2Gs and 3Gs and so forth, and we see survivors having resilience. My grandmother was one of the most optimistic people I knew, and she had incredible resilience as a survivor. And I named my first child after her because of that. And the resilience that students need, any student, anytime, any level, needs resilience. because things get hard in life, and we have to bounce back from difficulty. So the Holocaust is very applicable, genocide generally very applicable to education generally, if we emphasize the resilience, as well as recognizing the trauma and the harm and so forth. So I tended to, like, my father, I think, is a guy thing, but my father tended to not talk about things that were difficult, including the Holocaust. I didn't have my grandfather, my grandmother, and to a little extent my aunt, who was a psychologist and professor of psychology, did talk about the difficult things, but modeled resilience, modeled the ability to endure and survive and continue. And I think that's a good narrative for all of us as people and as Holocaust educators and as family members. That's all I wanted to say. But I do understand the importance of reflecting back on the complicated, difficult, kind of quirky aspects of being a 2G, not having grandparents, or I guess the line I always started with was from an anthology of 2G writings. And when I was in school, I noticed that other people had grandparents. Why didn't I have grandparents? And I actually did have grandparents, but not the full set. And so the kind of difficulty that we inherit structurally and emotionally, the nightmares about riding trains in Europe and things like that, are real. But so is the resilience of survivors.
So I just want to follow up on both you and Mark's point, and I want to thank Ava and Ida and Henry, because this group that I founded in May of 21 was really what came out of the match that struck something in me, which was based on Ava and Ida and Henry's inclusiveness and welcoming me to their Holocaust family. And so I think your point about love and being inclusive is how I have built and wanted to model the Facebook group and the JCRnow.com group as a collective community of love, and for us to teach how the Holocaust can be shared with the younger generation through the various digital platforms that I've built in honoring my parents, and bringing the lessons of love as we are right now, right this minute, discussing. And these programs will be seen, and I can tell you that we've had over 9,000 views and members and plays to these programs that are streaming through the various platforms. And I just have to pinch myself all the time that I have gone from literally leave me out of this whole Holocaust thing to the turning and leaning in, and not, I can't do anything a little bit. So for me, leaning in isn't just leaning in. It's like, let's go big, big, big. My wife always says, you can't just do anything small. Why can't you just do something small? You have to go like, big, big, big. But that is a fundamental principle that I have used, and it resonates with people. Honestly, it really does. So thank you for bringing that forward. Who wants to add something else? Go ahead, Naomi.
Okay, after the war, I was 2 years old, and my parents went to synagogue. We were Jews. And I found out that I was only one Jewish girl from whole capital city of Slovakia who survived the war.
Wow.
Only one. And after the Yisrael services, and we were children, they sent us out from the synagogue because children are not supposed to be inside. We were Orthodox Jews. When people came out, the floor was wet. And I was asking my parents, what's happening? What is it? What were you doing there? And they were crying. Everybody who was in synagogue was Holocaust survivor. And this, I feel it till now. It was horrible.
Do you know how many? Do you know how many people? When you say that you were the only child survivor, do you know how many people were killed in your community?
Everybody my age, nobody, not even one. I was born in 1943, and there were absolutely no Jewish girls or boys who survived the war my age. Zero.
Wow.
But after my brother, he was born in 1944, he was only 8 months old when the war ended. He was another one who was nobody in the city. But when he went to the synagogue, everybody was kissing me. And I hated kissing till I was about 16 years old. I couldn't stand anybody to touch me. Now I'm okay. I can kiss Tibor, but I couldn't stand anything like this. And after I went to school when I was 6 years old, it was not communist country yet. And they were praying, and I was only a Jewish child. And they were praying those Christian prayers. I was putting my hand into my ears, and there was a director of that school. Every day he came to that class, and he was asking, who is other religion than Christian? And he knew that whole school was nobody else Jewish except me. And this is what I remember till now. Okay, I let Tibor talk when he wants to talk.
I want to ask you, Naomi, how did you meet Tibor?
I met him in Prague. My father was president of Jewish communities for whole Slovakia, and I think he knew Tibor. And we went for a coffee with my father. Tibor was there.
How old were you?
I was 23.
Already an engineer, land surveyor.
I was 22 years old, and I have master's degree in engineering. I was smart enough at the time. And Tibor told me, okay, I'm going to show you Prague. And Prague is a beautiful city. And he left, he was living on the west side of Czechoslovakia at the time. And I went with my father back to Bratislava, and I invited Tibor to come to visit me next month. He sent me telegram, and I never received the telegram, but I had telepathy. I went to the railway station, and Tibor was there. And I took him, I wanted him to come hiking. I was a vivid hiker. I wanted to hike. And he was saying, I am not going to any forest. I had no idea why. Okay, we went to Old Castle, and Tibor asked me if I'm going to marry him. It was second time I saw him, and third time, this is.
But we corresponded a lot.
We corresponded.
Every day.
So when you brought Tibor home to your parents, what did they think?
My parents, they were very happy that I have Jewish men. They were not Jewish children. There was nobody, there was no Jewish boys. My father was very happy. But when my father found out that he's 14 years older, and 14, and he showed everybody around Jews. Every man was about 12, 14 years older than that wife. Okay, we got married. And at that time, we had a civil ceremony in Prague and Jewish ceremony in Bratislava, Slovakia. But Jewish ceremony was illegal at that time. And my father was saying, we survived the war, and my daughter is going to have very big Jewish wedding. Everybody from Slovakia came to Bratislava, and it was more people on my wedding than on Yom Kippur.
And even non-Jews came because for 20 years it was forbidden to have religious wedding publicly.
And when you brought Naomi home to your parents, Tibor, what did they say?
I lived 20 hours by train away from my mother. My father didn't make it. And I can tell you why and how. My brother either communist regime just caused that they didn't make it alive. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is about continuation of Mike. Why, how I survived. And it was a resilience and resistance. My parents were Halutzim in 1920s in British Palestine, British Mandate Palestine. And they read Mein Kampf in 1925. My mother knew that Nazis would, and my grandparents knew that Nazis were plotting. They just didn't know how they would kill the Jews, but we believed that they would somehow try to do that. And 1940, I was kicked out of school. I was 10 years old. When I was 12, it was already, deportation started. Auschwitz was from where we lived about 50 miles, about 1 hour by train, and a lot of trains were going towards Poland, to the north. And they told us to bring our tools because we are going to work in a factories. Germany needs labor. They want to win the war. Families will be fed. Whoever could work would work. And it was no idea, not a single thought that we were sentenced to death. VIEWseum conference in January, in February 1942 decided even how we would all die with a Zyklon B, gas chambers, crematoria. Everything was ready already, which means the transports were going, deportations were going, and we had nothing to eat because for 2 years we didn't have any properties, no jobs, everything confiscated. And I went to fish to the local creek in the middle of the night. And ice was floating around me. It was so cold, very high in the mountains. And I heard from a little, it was a one-room prison in that town. It was a county seat, only 2,000 people in that little village, but it was a county seat and had a prison. And I was submerged in water, 12 years old boy, and heard something in Yiddish and Polish, "Hey boy, come here." Which means that I came close, climbed a rock to that bar windows with of the prison, and that hand came out with a gold coin saying, "If you get us out of here, you get a fistful of those coins." They just figured out that the boy fishing middle of the night in icy water without any equipment, with hands catching trout, must be illegal, because why would he do such a silly thing? If he was legal, he could fish at daytime with a hook and line. Naturally, I ran with the coin to my mother, contacted somebody.
Oh, you froze, Tibor. Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
And we hid them in an apartment, of already deported Jews, which was sealed on the front door. And then my mother spoke French. She was a teacher of many languages, including French, and they were Belgian people, Polish people, and a group of people. They were medical doctors, 3 of them out of a group of 4. And my mother asked, why did you escape? You obviously are Jewish, and who are you, and why did you ask us for help? They said, oh, we escaped from a village of Auschwitz. It's a concentration camp, and the Jews are coming there. They take few people out who are able to work, and the rest goes to so-called showers to disinfect, but they are not showers. They are just gas. It is a room where they get poisoned by gas, and then they are cremated. In 2 hours. They process 1,000 or 2,000 people. They call it processing. And the pile of ashes are just packed and sent to German market farmers as fertilizers. And my father said, my father said, my 7 siblings have been deported already. My mother said, my parents, my sisters, 3 husbands were deported. For good heavens, don't tell us stories. We help you anyway. Why should we not help you if you need help? You don't have to exaggerate. You don't have to kid us. You don't have to scare us and so. And they said, no. We had to hide them for 10 days so that police would stop searching for them, and they would, some other prisoners would fill the prison and so on. Which means that 10 days, it took them 3 days to convince us that the really people coming to Auschwitz, it was by accident Auschwitz, VIEWseum in Polish, where people were coming, a transport of 2,000 people was coming in, and maybe 50 people were taken out of the transport, strong young men and women, girls, and the rest were just turned into ashes within 2 hours. It was cleaned up, and they could process 10 to 15 to 20,000 people a day, which means that this was something I watched, I listened, 12 years old boy, and understood that my grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, I had a lot of cousins. My father had 7 siblings, and they had a lot of children. And I understood, somehow I had to come to terms with the idea that practically all my relatives, except my parents and siblings, were murdered. And one grandfather was not murdered. Which means that, I didn't have any trauma. We decided, my mother called us to say, should we finish our lives voluntarily, or should we resist? Should we resist against all odds, because all governments of Europe were against us, were helping Germans, were cooperating. All offices, all policemen, all secret police, we had nowhere to hide. We had yellow stars on us, which means that we decided that we are not going to take our lives. We are going to, against all odds, fight, which means that it was no space or time or thought not to be not to think of not resisting or not be resilient, and not to be strong, and not to really fight against practically all world, because 1,000 miles in all directions, Nazis were taken over the territory and Gestapo ruled. Which means that I didn't want to just compliment Mike, that those who survived had all be resilient, all resist, and all those people lived.
Tibor, I'm honored that you chose to share your testimony here. It is something that just needs to sink in. And you talked about Auschwitz. My mother and her 2 sisters survived Auschwitz. Her father survived Auschwitz. Her mother did not, because her baby sister Magda, who was only 8, was ordered off the cattle car and told to go to the right by Mengele. And her mother wouldn't let go of her hand, and they died by gas on the very first day upon arrival. The other 3 sisters survived as camps, schwesters, they used to say. And her father was immediately ordered into the men's lager. They didn't know at all whether he was alive or dead for the time they were in Auschwitz. And they only met each other on liberation. So I am so honored that you chose to be able to be recorded. Your testimony will live on forever. And it's important when someone denies the Holocaust, they can look at your testimony and hear it from a survivor. And that makes a world of difference. So thank you.
If somebody asks how they escaped, I can tell you in a few words. 1,000 or 2,000 people were in a transport, in the cattle cars which arrived to Auschwitz. Empty train returned to Slovakia. There were about 70,000 Jews later on, the whole 80,000 Jews deported. Which means that a lot of trains left Slovakia in 1942. And those people were medical doctors, and they were working on biological weapons. They had with them ampules of cholera, typhoid, and so on, which means the Nazis wanted to murder all the Poles and all the Russians so that they would take over territory. Anyway, those people talked to the locomotive engineer and told him, here are, a lot of gold or a lot of jewelry and whatever. We give you more and more and more if you bring us railroad uniforms. And he did, because the money was good, simply rather poor people, and the money was good. And they dressed into the railroad uniform, started putting a coal into the engine, the locomotive, and cleaning the train, and left. The Germans didn't notice that some workers in a railroad uniform, Slovak railroad uniforms, left with a train, with an empty train. And this way, at the Slovak border, the locomotive engineer said, jump out, give me my uniforms, jump out. And this is how they were arrested as Polish smugglers. It was the border area. Smugglers were all over, which means that this way they told us how they were, how they escaped, and how they were in that prison where I discovered them. And eventually, without that knowledge, I would not be alive myself, because this we learned in a direct evidence, direct eyewitnesses about the first, Wenzel and Werber Rosenberg came 2 years later, escaped 2 years later, and tried to save Hungarian Jews in 1944. This was 1942. And I have to tell you something to connect to American Jews who believe that the Holocaust could not happen and would not happen again, and it's out of the question, which means that for those people, a message. We try to convince Jews who were ready to be deported to a labor camp. Nobody told us, Jews, we are going to kill you. And nobody believed us. Not nobody. Few people believed us, and they saved themselves, and we met them after the war. Only those who believed us, something totally unbelievable, that they would be nicely deported somewhere to be murdered. Nobody believed us that day. Now, it's ever since there were a lot of genocides and a lot of terrible wars and so on. But that time, it was inconceivable. It was beyond belief. And Jews didn't believe us and went there and were murdered. Which means that this is a message to those who believe that Holocaust could not possibly happen again. No, it can happen again. And I hope it will not, because Israel is strong and we know that it could happen again.
Well, I'm not going to follow up, as you said, Mark, Tibor. So I think we're just going to let that absorb. And I thank you so much for your contributions. This has been an absolute pleasure to be with you all. to share, to learn. And we'll do this again 2 months from now, again on Wednesday. I'll call the date so you all know. Hold on 1 second. So March, it would be April the 12th. So put that in your calendars, April the 12th. And we'll take care. And this recording will be available tomorrow or the next day on the YouTube channel for jcrnow.com, so you can share it. It'll also be in the VIEWseum under exhibitions. Nice to see you. And again, Devorah, thank you, Tibor, Zola, Judith, Anne, Mark, and all of you who are listening. And Michael, this was a terrific time. The Learning Sam, Sammy, and we'll see you again. And by one reminder, this Sunday, we have our live Zoom event with two terrific authors, Jennifer Coburn and Jeanette Gelman, and some special guests on music, which I'm not going to share because I want it to be a surprise. So we will all see you hopefully on Sunday. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.